and now we continue with NHL talk. And I guess we probably got to lead with some Toronto Maple Leafs here. We talked about it a lot. It's been a therapy session in here. And now joining us is Steven Psihogios of Northstar Bets, our resident Bruins fan, which I'm sure he has a lot to say. So the floor is yours, Stevie.
Well, I apologize if this had been a therapy session of sorts before I got here, because I'm going to ruin any progress that was made. Because last night, that game, I mean, I tore my ACL on Friday. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. So I know a lot about staying at home. And the Maple Leafs, they should have just stayed at home last night. Honestly, the way they showed up in that first period, they should have just stayed at home. It was an awful effort through the first 20. And you know what? I will agree that, maybe there were some issues with officiating, like that Shen call was pretty weak, and so was the Kampf one. But I mean, when you dig yourself a 2-0 hole before you can even say boo, it's not going to be a pretty game.
What do you think the biggest issue was for the Leafs?
Well, the one thing I noticed was Tampa Bay, we talked about it last week, had been kind of floundering the last few weeks of the season. We saw them turn that switch on, and they brought an A-level game. Like, they really brought the intensity. The Maple Leafs, I'm starting to wonder, do they have this next gear that they can kick it up to? Because, yeah, it's great. You can win a bunch of games in the regular season, a really good year by all accounts, right? Like, any team not named the Boston Bruins, they are either 2 points behind or far ahead of. But the Maple Leafs, I don't know what it is. They didn't bring it to that next level. There was nobody last night who I sat and thought, wow, you know what? They really are trying to rally this group. I just didn't see it.
Stevie, we talked about earlier, this team knew that they're going to be playing the Tampa Bay Lightning pretty much all season. How do they show up to game one at home so not ready to play? Is it on Sheldon Keefe or is it on the players themselves?
It's on the players. Like, Keefe can only do so much. He's not out there executing. I think coaches in general take too much blame and get too much credit most of the time. I think the blame really has to fall on the players. You've got to go out and execute. You know the task at hand. You know the opponent. You just played them last week, and you were in a playoff series with them last year. You know what this team's all about. And to come out as flat as they did, and to think that, okay, maybe officiating wasn't great in the second and third, you can have some fair gripes about that. But, you're not going to get a good result when you go down 2-0 in the playoffs that quickly. You can't win a game in the first period, but you can lose one. And Toronto lost that game right away.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a pathetic performance. And listen, it's game one. Much can happen. The Leafs really lose back-to-back games throughout the regular season, but that's a key word to me: regular, as in regular season. This team has got superstars in the regular season. Sheldon Keefe, one of the best coaches in the regular season. I can't remember another team that's been so dominant in the regular season, but then just hits that switch and goes off in the playoffs.
Yeah, and it goes to my point earlier of not having that next gear. Like, I don't know what it is with this group, but you see the Lightning, they ratchet up the intensity. This team was not looking so hot entering the playoffs. We alluded to it on last week's show. Okay, you know what? It's a different season. It's a different beast, the playoffs. And we saw firsthand last night, one team treated it differently, and one team treated it like game 53 of the regular season. That's all I saw. And there was just a lot of shortcomings from a lot of individuals who are getting paid a lot of money to come through this time of year. So I just was not impressed by anything Toronto did. And it is a 7-game series, and one bad game. We saw Tampa Bay lose 5-0 last year and then come back and win the series. One bad game doesn't define the series. But from this group, the expectation should have been a strong start, considering the last time we saw them in the postseason was a loss in Game 7 to this team, and considering the fact that there's so much history behind this team falling short in the playoffs.
That being said, Victor Hedman is a game-time decision for tomorrow. That's obviously key. Chernak's out for sure. If Hedman is out longer than one game, that is a series-altering injury potentially.
For sure. I mean, this is a Tampa Bay team that already lost a couple of key pieces from last year's series. You look at guys like Jan Bruta and Ryan McDonough. Those were two key contributors for the Lightning, already gone. And now if you have Cernak gone on top of also now potentially losing Hedman, like, I'm surprised that we didn't see it play more of a factor last night, because you know what? It was a 3-goal game heading into the third. But when you're playing a team with only 4 defensemen, you could really take advantage of that. And I didn't think the Maple Leafs did. They looked like they thought the game was over at that point, and they just were kind of mailing it in. But I do think the Hedman injury is a series altering one because John Cooper relies on him so much to shut down your best player. And if you don't have that guy in your back pocket to eliminate the opposition's best, that's going to be felt, especially if Toronto can win tomorrow and make this a longer series here.
We got to talk about goaltending. Ilya Samsonov. I think he didn't play that bad. I mean, the first period could have been 6-0 for all we could have seen if he wasn't in net. But then after the game, Sheldon Keefe was kind of non-committal towards him. And then today he comes out saying, no, Samsonov is playing. Do you think that will affect his confidence going into probably the biggest game in a while? That, his coach kind of was a bit weary about him after the game.
I don't think so. I don't think the comments really are going to do much. I think he had to kind of see it coming at that point. He got pulled after the first 2 periods. It was a bit of a mercy pulling, but still, Samsonov doesn't have a great postseason track record. I've talked about it in the past. Last time we saw him pretty much in the playoffs, he was coughing up the puck to the Bruins in overtime, and Ovechkin banished him to the bench for the rest of that series, just yelling at him. So this isn't someone who's got a great postseason track record, but I also don't think it's fair to put Joseph Woll in at this point of his career. I think if you're putting him in against the Lightning in a series where he's going to have to be better than Andrei Vasilevsky, you're really not setting him up for a whole lot of success. And especially at this stage of his career, I'd be reluctant. I think you roll with Samsonov at this point. Murray, if he gets healthy and things aren't looking too hot, maybe you think about putting him in. But I think at this point, you have to ride it out with Samsonov. And if they do flip to Woll, he better be solid. Otherwise, there's no going back to Samsonov. Once you cross that bridge, that's it. It's done.
Yeah, Samsonov 1-7 in the playoffs, 3.45 goals against. After allowing 5+ goals this season, he's 5-0-1. So make of that what you will. We're speaking with Steven Tsihogios of Northstar Bets. For those wondering, by the way, the Leafs massive favorites in Game 2, according to Northstar Bets, -162 to Tampa's +132. All right, let's talk about some other games that are happening tonight. The Boston Bruins looking to take a 2-zip lead on the Florida Panthers. Stevie, I thought the Bruins weren't great, but the additions that they made at the deadline really stepped up. One in particular being Tyler Bertuzzi. I thought he fit into this team perfectly, and how he played. He's an instigator a little bit. He can play heavy. He can play make. He can obviously score goals as well. Do you think without Patrice Bergeron, they're going to have to lean on the likes of Bertuzzi to hopefully win this series?
Definitely. I think you saw a lot of depth guys step up for Boston in that Game 1. I thought Taylor Hall had a great game. He had a couple of chances he set up Trent Frederick on that they just couldn't convert. And Bertuzzi was the biggest standout, I thought, at forward. Even just the little things that he does, like that pass to Pasternak where he's got like eyes on the back of his head and he's able to spot the open man. A nice little touch. Also, great job forechecking. He was just really tenacious on the forecheck. And the little things too, like grabbing Nick Cousins' stick on his way to the bench, and I mean, he didn't break it. He tried to break it, but just those little things, like he just looks like a guy who was born to wear the black and yellow. He's just a pain in the butt. When Brad Marchand is complimenting you on your peskiness, you've made it, right? That's the ultimate compliment from the ultimate pesk. So I think Bertuzzi is going to step up a lot. Zaka stepped up. I thought he did a pretty good job defensively, stepping in and filling Bergeron's shoes as the #1 center. And Boston, their goal, like, not to be rude to Florida, but it should probably be just to end this series as quickly as possible and give Bergeron time to rehabilitate, because he's not going to be in the lineup tonight. And when Montgomery was asked whether it's going to be illness or because of injury, he said it's not because of illness. So he's dealing with something, and that's someone you want to give as much time as possible to when it comes to resting him.
Yeah, that was my next question. Do you think the Bruins need Bergeron to win this series?
No, honestly, I don't think they need him. Having him in the lineup and being at full strength is nice, and they'll really miss him, I think, on the road when they can't control the matchups, just because he's so good defensively. But I don't think that having him in the lineup is a necessity to beat the Florida Panthers. They're getting some positive injury news with Sam Bennett coming back tonight, but the Bruins, I think if they play their game, which is limit the Panthers to perimeter opportunities, which I thought they did a good job of. Linus Ullmark was sharp, but I didn't think he had to be spectacular in Game 1, and be opportunistic with their chances on a goalie who is not proven really at all at the NHL level. I think the Bruins can win this series in relatively quick order.
You mentioned Allmark there, and I think most of the NHL was grasping at straws, thinking, well, if there's one concern, it's the experience or lack thereof in the playoffs for Allmark. But after one game, looked pretty decent.
Yeah, he was rock solid. And one of the concerns with Allmark too was he was pulled from a game last week early because of a lower body injury. So you're a little concerned about that. There's a stomach bug going around the Bruins locker room. So you're also worried about that as well because he picked that up. Swayman was dealing with it, and so was Allmark. But I mean, any concerns were silenced immediately in that last game. He made a couple of stops earlier that were impressive. And other than the one goal Tkachuk scored, the Panthers didn't get too many grade A chances, and he was able to turn aside the ones that they did. So I think Allmark silenced a lot of the doubts, the ones you mentioned, James, as far as the experience and also about his health and his status for the series as well.
Stevie, let's go to Alberta, talk about the Edmonton Oilers, my Stanley Cup pick. They got up to a bit of a rough start. Connor McDavid was held off the score sheet. When you look at the Oilers, I find that they have great spurts, but they have those maturity issues. And Leon Draisaitl talked about it at the end of the game. Is this team mature enough to win a Stanley Cup?
I think so. I think they learned a lot from last year in the postseason. And game one, that was a collapse. I mean, you have two separate 2-goal leads in that third period, and you lose them both en route to losing in overtime. It was not a good look on Edmonton whatsoever. But I think this team's going to bounce back in a big way on Wednesday night. I think Edmonton, it's just going to be trying to find a way to free up Connor McDavid, because the Kings, you know what? They can game plan really well. You got to give Todd McClellan a lot of credit. He has been able to keep McDavid at bay when they've played head-to-head this year, and he did it in game one, but doing it, 2-3 times over the course of a series is going to be hard. McDavid got held to 0 points in a game last year against LA, and he followed that up with a 3-point performance. So I do think that McDavid has a big night, and the rest of the series, I don't think you'll see him go pointless again. And I think Edmonton, they've got what it takes. I think having a guy like Ekholm now in the back end who has been to a Stanley Cup final with the Nashville Predators, he can give info and some insight on what they've been through. I think that's an Edmonton team that's going to come back in a big way tonight.
Leon Draisaitl as well. I think he puts up a massive amount of points, but quickly, what makes him so special out there in the ice? Because when I watch him play, he's absolutely dominant out there.
I think it's just his smarts. If you watch him, he's such a smart player. I mean, look at the first goal that he scored last game. He loses himself in the offensive zone. It looks like he's tired at the end of a shift, but he's not. What he's doing is he's just losing the attention of the defense. The puck goes behind the net, and then he's able to get to that scoring area. He's so good at getting there. And you look at the replay, and you think, how can Leon Draisaitl be open in the slot, wide open? But it's because he's so smart. He realizes when to back off and then when to pursue the puck. So I think, to me, when you watch him play, he's just a really smart player.
Stevie, in 30 seconds or less, can you give us your best bet of the night?
Definitely. My best bet for tonight, I'm rolling with Teuvo Teravainen to not score a point for the Carolina Hurricanes. It was at -108 earlier today at Northstar Bets. There's been some line movement on, and I got it at -108. But, I mean, this guy has 1 point in his last 10 games. And, I mean, there's hardly any goal scoring between the Canes and the Isles here. So the fact that, you could get a 1-0 game and it wouldn't surprise me. So give me Teravainen to not get anything tonight.
Yeah, Stevie also has a parlay over at northstarbets.ca, so go check that out. Stevie Psihogios, feel better, and let's talk again soon.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, guys.